here are 2 facts you should probably know. Fact the first. When a human being is driven into a corner, you should never underestimate the levels of stupid and dangerous they will resort to in order to escape. Fact the second. If a deal seems too good to be true, it is. Now, normally, I wouldn't be the kind of guy you should be taking advice from. If I wrote an autobiography, it'd be called Jesus Wept. But in this very specific instance, I have some valuable experience. It started, as most tragic stories tend to, with a series of short-sighted mistakes. About a decade or so back, I was a few years out of college and trying to build a life for myself. I was single, educated, and driven, all the qualities someone needs to succeed in life. Well, not the single part, but you get the idea. I had prospects, some real potential, but like Oscar Wilde once said, I can't resist anything except temptation. Yeah, I was an English major. I didn't get hooked on meth or porn or anything like that. No, my vice was the thrill of chance. Gambling was the greatest rush I'd ever experienced. Just giving up control, letting the gods of probability and randomness decide your fate. I got hooked. Kept going to those damn casinos night after night. Looking back, I was naive, was foolish. It had taken an idiot, blinded by a lust for sensation, to not realize another crucial fact. The house always, I repeat, always wins. To make a long, painful story short, at the tender age of 24, the local pit bosses had taken me for all I was worth, and then some. As a result, I was indebted to some unsavory characters who were not all that keen on giving me some leeway on the money I owed them. I managed to pull together just shy of $100 a week doing odd jobs, but that was a fraction of what I was in for. At the time, it seemed like a better idea to just piss away what money I had at a local bar, rather than carrying on my sad little exercise in futility. So that's exactly what I did. And by virtue of a few gallons of the cheapest spirit you can possibly imagine, I can't remember a great deal of what happened after that. Next thing I know, I'm waking up in a puddle behind the bar, having been turfed out for making an ass of myself. The electric buzz of the neon signs above my head felt like I was taking a power drill to the frontal lobe, while the cold, filthy water below my face helped me sober up a smidgen, just enough to make me aware. It was right then, in my lowest possible moment, that I met him. "Hey there, buddy," he said, his voice pleasantly cheerful and melodic. "You look like you need a helping hand. Thankfully, I've got 2. There was a gentle tug on both of my shoulders, pulling me upright. He leaned me against the wall. I could finally take a better look at him. To begin with, I wondered if I was hallucinating. He seemed so strange, so out of place. My good Samaritan was about 6.5 feet tall, but he was built like a pack of uncooked spaghetti. A long, lean string bean of a man. That being said, the black and white pinstripe suit he was wearing still somehow managed to be form-fitting, like it was just painted directly onto a featureless body. Above his collar, fastened to the top button and held in place by a large and ugly bow tie, sat a pale, grinning head with black hair parted in the middle. Truth be told, my initial thought after properly taking in the sight of him was as follows. Holy shit, I died in a puddle, and this is Death himself come to collect my pathetic soul. Sadly, that was not the case. I was in fact still alive. There we are, pal. That's a lot better, isn't it? He said, kneeling down on his long, real thin legs to look me in the eye. We'll have you feeling like $1,000,000 in no time, never fear. While back then I just assumed it was my drunken mind playing tricks on me, I remember his eyes seeming strangely yellowish. They had a kind of jaundiced sheen to them, like sclera and iris just melted together into a single formless mass. eyes like goddamn egg yolks. It's always such a shame to catch folks in a pickle, such a shame, he said largely to himself, I think. Whatever happened to helping people out, you know? It's a good feeling. Who are you? I managed to choke out. The kind stranger smiled and turned his sulphuric eyes towards me. You're asking the wrong person there, amigo. I tell you if I knew, honest, he replied with a laugh. What's your name, though? Nate, I said, wondering if I was about to vomit or not. Nate Wilson. Oh my god! That's such an awesome name, the stranger said, as a sudden explosion of interest on his face told me that he wasn't faking his misplaced enthusiasm. Nate Wilson. He has a ring to it, don't you think? Oh god, what a great name. You're a lucky guy, Nate. Lucky to have such a great name. Thanks, I guess? There was a long, awkward silence after that. I sure as hell didn't know what to say, and the stranger seemed more than content to just stand there and stare at me, grinning like a freak. It felt like it was my responsibility to break that irritating silence. Look, I really appreciate you helping me, buddy, I began. Wait, you consider us buddies? He asked. His tone was, at that state, ambiguous. I mean, you saved me from breathing alley water, so I guess so, yeah? Now, this might seem hard to believe because I definitely didn't believe it at the time, but the stranger literally jumped up into the air and whooped loudly. A grown man behind a dive bar doing that. It was like something out of a strange dream that your one boring friend always wants to tell you about. Well, this is fantastic, he said, grinning ear to ear like he just won the fucking lottery. It was so wonderful to make new friends. He extended a spindly arm towards me, his hand open and his spidery fingers outstretched. Put her here, friendo, he said. And because that night wasn't weird enough already, you better believe that I did. That's what I'm talking about, he said with another childish cackle, pulling me to my feet with disarming levels of strength. Through the power of friendship, anything is possible. Sure, he may have spoken like his only experience with the outside world was watching Saturday morning cartoons, but he seemed innocent enough. A benign weirdo just trying to help people along his way. Though, I must admit, the fact he was reluctant to tell me his name was somewhat of a red flag for me. Now, I'm gonna be completely honest with you, Nate. He began, his amber gaze turned downwards in what might have been embarrassment. There was a reason I followed you out here. It wasn't just a stroke of good luck. My heart immediately sank. I knew he was too good to be true. This was when he stabbed me, cut me up, wore my skin as a suit, and turned the rest of me into makeshift lasagna. Nobody was ever that happy at that hour of night if they had all their psychological ducks in a row. Well, if you're being honest, I said, swaying on my feet, still too drunk to defend myself, would that reason happen to be my murder? He seemed shocked at first, then began to laugh. Do you think a murder would be this friendly? He asked. Molestation, then? Oh, Jesus, no way, Nate. You're a good-looking guy, don't get me wrong, but you're not really my type. Then what does a guy like you have to do with a guy like me? I asked, the needle on my internal emotive scale creeping from curious to irritated. Well... He paused again, as though searching for the proper words. He was looking at everything but me. The bar, he finally said. How much of what happened in there do you remember? Somewhere in the margin of nothing, I think, I said, now leaning against the wall for support. You were talking to the bartender. Loudly, he said, bouncing up and down on the balls of his feet. I wasn't eavesdropping, not at all. I just happened to overhear. You were talking about some kind of money troubles? I'd almost forgotten about them myself, but the second he said it, all the memories came barreling into me like some nauseating tidal wave. I'd ranted and raved, screamed at the top of my lungs. Debt, debt, debt. I got belligerent when I felt they weren't showing me enough sympathy, and when I got belligerent, I was rightly thrown out on my inebriated ass. Oh, don't worry about those, I said, my cheeks reddening with shame. That's not your problem, I'll deal with it. Oh, but Nate, you didn't sound like you could deal with it. What the hell is it to you? I snapped back. The stranger stopped talking and began reaching into his jacket. I got a sudden flash of paranoia that he worked for one of the casinos and he was going to put a bullet between my eyes. Well, you're my best friend, Nate, he said. And friends are meant to help each other out of sticky situations, aren't they? He produced a stack of bills from a pocket inside his suit and passed it over to me. Do you reckon this will be enough? He asked. It was at this point that I was most open to the idea of this all being some crazy dream. With the ferocity of a madman, I quickly counted the money this total stranger, calling me his best friend, had handed me. 20 fucking grand. It could bail me out and then some. Holy shit, I said, though I can't remember if it was out loud or in my head. I can't possibly accept this. Well, please do, he said with another ear-to-ear grin. You need an awful lot more than I do. A sober me might have been too proud to indulge him, but funnily enough, drunk me had a far more realistic take on my level of desperation. I was a desperate man trapped in a corner. Fact the first, when a human being is driven into a corner, you should never underestimate the levels of stupid and dangerous they will resort to in order to escape. But why? Was the only question I could summon. Well, because I like you, he said, and I like helping people. But you've only just met me. Well, so what? A friend is a friend is a friend. Why overthink it? I collapsed back against the wall, holding the stranger's 20 grand. I was way out of my dire situation. I'll pay you back, every penny, with fucking interest, I swear to God, I said. The stranger laughed. No need, I've got no shortage of money. Just take and bill yourself out, okay? Then promise me you'll stop gambling. There were big, swollen tears running down my burning cheeks. The stranger's kindness was baffling, but it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever experienced. He was a true saint in flesh and blood. I'll never gamble another penny, I said. Without another word, I lunged forward and hugged him. A long, warm, tight embrace. By the end, I could feel his emaciated limbs wrapped across my back. Thank you so much, I whispered, my tears dripping onto the shoulder of his suit. What are friends for, right? When I finally pried myself off of him, I just couldn't stop laughing. It was nerves, probably. The stranger watched me, a kind of eccentric joy burning in his big yellow eyes. He seemed to like just observing. Oh, one more thing, he said, reaching into his jacket again. A little something I wrote up in the bar just to help you out. He passed me a piece of paper, folded into the size of a pamphlet. I didn't even think to check it at the time, I just shoved it into the pocket of my filthy coat and carried on thanking him. I needed that money, Lord knows I did, but I couldn't just take it without giving something in return. There must be something you want, man, I pleaded, palms open in deference to his generosity. Anything. I owe you my life, man. You just name your price. I can't thank you enough. The stranger grinned and stroked his narrow chin in contemplation. Now, that's an irresistible offer, he said, almost jokingly. You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Wilson. Leave it with me, okay? I'm sure I'll think of something. He began walking away after that, whistling, of all things. Sunshine, lollipops and rainbows as he did so. Now I was laughing again. Half out of giddiness, half an acknowledgement of the sheer strangeness of the events transpiring around me. Right then, as I sat outside a shitty bar covered in dirty water, my own tears, and more than a little puke, I was the luckiest human being on the planet. What do you give to a man who has everything? I said aloud. The stranger looked over his shoulder at me one more time, his odd eyes meeting mine. Almost everything, Nate. Almost everything. And just like that, the stranger was gone. It's almost funny, isn't it? How someone like that can have such a profound impact on your life and then just up and disappear just as quickly. like a comet just trailing past. You only catch its light for a brief instant, and then it's dark again. Using the stranger's money, I paid off my gambling debts in full, and still had a little left over. I swore to stick to my promise, for my own sake and his. In the 10 years that have passed since that day, I haven't gambled a cent. Once I was all square with the house, I finally took a moment to check the piece of paper that he left me with. At first, I only sort of skimmed it, and it didn't make a great deal of sense to me. Just a list of dates from 2007 to 2017, each accompanied by a sentence fragment. It was only then when I sat down and took a long, hard look at what those fragments actually were, that I realized the stranger couldn't possibly have been human. No, it was so much more than that. It was a list of instructions, specific down to the days, minutes, hours and seconds, where to be and what to do in order to maximize success at that given moment. He left stock tips for companies that didn't exist, but would come into existence exactly when he predicted they would. He left exact instructions on which house to buy and how to get it at the best price, clothes to wear, jobs to take, friends to make. 5th of October 2009, go to Starbucks in town, meet Jesse O'Brien, 3:51:17 p.m. 2 years later, Jesse O'Brien became Jesse Wilson. The stranger had even engineered me meeting the love of my goddamn life, precise to the exact second we'd first make eye contact. I invested in the right stocks and pulled out of the wrong ones, avoiding company deaths and market crashes like some financial Houdini. My capital skyrocketed and my personal wealth just grew greater and greater. 8th of June 2011, buy a house 10 Aspen Way, don't rent, 6:14:43 p.m. And so I did. Jesse and I moved into that big, gorgeous house once our honeymoon was over. We were wealthy, healthy, and deeply in love. But something was missing. Something the stranger had accounted for too. 17th of August 2012, conceived child with Jesse, 8:31:19 p.m. Our little girl is called April. The stranger picked it, not me. She's 4 now, and I love it with all my heart. The stranger, a man who I'd known for less than an hour, had steered the entire course of my life in the best possible direction, out of nothing more than the kindness of his heart. He'd saved me. He'd saved all of us. Even though it had been 10 years since that day and I was drunk out of my mind at the time, I remember every detail so vividly. That's why, as I was walking down the street this morning, my arms full of grocery bags, when I heard someone singing "Sunshine, Lollipops and Rainbows" a few feet behind me. I recognized the voice instantly. Sunshine, lollipops and rainbows, everything that's wonderful is what I feel when we're together. Brighter than a lucky penny when you're near, the rain cloud disappears, dear, and I feel so fine. His melodic voice sang, his tone screaming joviality. Without a moment's hesitation, I turned to face him. It looked like that strange man hadn't aged a day in an entire decade. He even wore that same pinstriped suit that he had on the first night I met him. Just to know that you are mine. He finished the verse with a smile and threw open his arms. Jesus Christ, I said, my face cracking into a smile impossible to hide. It's actually you. The one and only, baby, he said with a laugh and a grandiose hand gesture. How's Jesse, by the way? I opened my mouth to answer, but he raised a hand as though to politely silence me. Oh, I'm sorry to drop in after, gosh, has it really been 10 years? Oh, geez Louise, the time really does tend to get away from me, he said. Anyway, the reason I'm here is because I finally figured out what I wanted from you. Beg your pardon? 10 years ago, you said you owed me something, anything, he replied, though I almost heard it back in my own voice as he said it. I couldn't decide at the time, but I think I know now. Oh, of course, that's wonderful to hear, man, I said, my heart filled with a sudden trepidation. So what is it that you want? The stranger gave that same ear-to-ear grin that he was wearing back behind the dive bar in 2007. Well, I've thought about it for a long time, amigo, and I finally made my decision, he said. I know what I want from you, Nate. He paused to take a step closer to me. His eyes were just as golden in the daylight. "I want your name, Nate." I almost laughed to begin with, but I soon realized he wasn't joking. He was deadly serious. "My name?" "Oh yeah, Nate, I've always loved your name. It's so wonderful," he said, wringing his hands with glee. "Well, you see, I've never had a name myself, and it's always left me feeling a little left out, you know? I've wanted a name for so long, and I decided just recently that the name I want is yours. I think it'll fit me just right." This man had given me my entire life. He saved me from getting killed by casino sharks back in '07, and every wonderful success I'd had ever since I owned entirely to this decade-long itinerary. With all this in mind, who was I to turn down his last batshit crazy request? If he wanted to go around calling himself Nate Wilson too, what right did I have to stop him? "Sure thing, buddy," I said with a smile. He leaned forward to embrace me, almost crushing the groceries against my chest. "Oh, you have no idea how happy you've made me. It's the least I can do after all you've done for me," I replied. The stranger, or rather Nate Wilson, extended another spidery hand towards me. "Well, let's shake on it," he said, his voice elated. And I did. We went our separate ways after that. I walked home and he ran off into the city, singing and cackling with mirth. It brought me some peace of mind to know that my debt to him was finally repaid, and that some simple token gesture was all that I needed to do. When I arrived back at 10 Aspen Way, I saw April playing around with her toy lawnmower in the front yard. I smiled and called to her, but she didn't respond. She was too wrapped up in her fictitious duties. I made my way inside with the groceries. Jessie was in the kitchen, cutting up carrots. Sunshine, lollipops and rainbows blasted out of the radio. They just kept getting weirder and weirder. "Hey babe," I called to her, putting the groceries on the table. "You'll never guess who I ran into this morning." Jessie didn't respond. She just carried on chopping and hummed to the tune. "Babe, is everything okay?" I asked. Still no response. At this point, I was beginning to get a little worried. With a peculiar heaviness to my every movement, I walked over to Jessie and placed a tentative hand on her shoulder. Just went straight through. Straight through her goddamn body like she was a hologram. Or I was. I recoiled with a short, sharp yelp and fell against the kitchen table. Again, no response from Jessie. What the hell had happened? "Honey, I'm home!" I heard a familiar voice call from the hallway outside. Jessie suddenly perked up, turning her head towards the noise. "Hi, sweetie," she said. "You were a while out there. I was beginning to get worried." The stranger walked into the kitchen, a smile stretched across his waxen face. "Oh, I'm sorry about that, honey bunny," he said. "I met an old friend in town. We had a little catch-up." As he said that last part, he threw me a sickening wink with one of his piss-yellow peepers. "Huh?" Jessie said. "Anyone I know?" She leaned forward and gave the stranger a kiss. The kind of kiss she always gave me. "Nah," the stranger said with a chuckle. "I don't think you've ever met him." Felt like my mind was going to implode. Nothing going on was making any kind of goddamn sense. The whole world had gone crazy. April called from outside, something about the grass. "You mind taking over the carrots for a sec, babe?" Jessie said to the stranger. "I better go check on April." "No problem, honey," he said, taking the knife from her hand and giving her another kiss. Jessie left the room, leaving just me and the stranger all alone. I quietly fumed, and he chopped carrots. "Okay, what the fuck is going on?" I finally asked him, when I gained the modicum of composure required to do so. "What have you done, you crazy fucking weirdo?" He carried on chopping the carrots. His eyes never left the chopping board. "Well, my name is Nate, stranger," he said. "I'd really appreciate if you called me by it." In my state of fury, I tried to grab him by the shoulder and turn him to face me. I could actually touch him, but he wouldn't budge. It was like trying to move a mountain. That's my name, this is my house, and that's my wife! I said to him, rage and confusion rendering my voice a crackly mess. I want you out of here, and out of my life! The stranger chuckled. I see that's where you're wrong, Slick. All that changed hands, he said. This is Nate Wilson's house. Jessie is Nate Wilson's wife, and this is Nate Wilson's life. And by the terms of our recent deal, I'm Nate Wilson. And you, good buddy? You're nobody. I won't accept that, I yelled, slamming my hand down on the kitchen countertop. Without another word, Nate Wilson rammed the knife through my hand. There was no pain, no blood. It just phased through, as though I no longer even existed. Word to the wise, stranger. Reality marches on regardless of whether you accept it, he said, as I pulled my hand away from the knife. Everything you have, everything you've tricked yourself into believing you earned, you got from my instructions. You never owned this life, stranger. You just rented it from me, piece by piece. And now it's mine. And there's not a thing you can do about it. He stuck the knife into the chopping board and turned around to me. Oh, except, of course, leave. And let me, my wife, and my daughter get on with our lives. Do you understand, stranger? I stood in crushing silence for a minute or two. But can I see them again? Well, sure you can. You can see them anytime you like. But only I can see you. Just like, up until around an hour ago, only you could see me. It doesn't feel good, does it? Being nobody, being nameless. The gravity of it all was finally closing in. I fell onto my ass and began to cry. Oh God. I was so fucking stupid, I said. What did I fall for all of this? Nate Wilson shrugged and ate a piece of carrot. Don't blame yourself, buddy, he said. I was waiting for centuries before I found someone who I could interact with. It isn't your fault that you happen to be that person, or that you had such an awesome name at the time. My name? You were only going to waste it, kiddo. If it wasn't there that night, a heavy would have broken your legs the next day. You would have gotten into painkillers and OD'd a few months later. Nate Wilson becomes gravestone fodder. What a waste that would have been, huh? But what do I do now? What I did, stranger, Nate Wilson said, eating another piece of carrot cake with undue relish. Ask around, find someone you can talk to. Might be this afternoon, who knows? Sure, it could be a week, month, year, decade, century. But I'm an eternal optimist. A century? I said, trying to ebb the stream of tears flowing out of me. I can't wait that long. Well, you'd be surprised, pal. Patience is something you'll learn being nameless. When you finally do manage to wrangle yourself a name, you'll appreciate it a little more this time. You'll make something of yourself. Like the second. If a deal seems too good to be true, it is. So is that it? I asked. Is that all you have for me? Nate Wilson nodded. I'm afraid so, good buddy. You seem like a nice enough guy. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You can always depend on the kindness of strangers, don't you know? As the man who had just stolen my entire existence carried on hacking up vegetables, I left the room, walking out of the kitchen, through the hallway, then out of the house entirely. I stole one last look at Jessie and April, his family, playing on the lawn, totally carefree, all smiles. They'd never even know I was gone. Perhaps it was better that way. No heartache. I whispered a goodbye that they'd never hear, and closed my eyes in a pointless attempt to shut off the tears I knew would be coming either way. I set off into the city after that, walking alone, in search of something. Hell, anything. Call myself. And that was that. The story of my unnaming. Perhaps Nate was right. Perhaps it was his life all along. Maybe he'll live it better. Live it kinder. He might be a better father, a better husband, a better Nate. I don't feel so attached to that name anymore. But if you know all this now, that means one good thing. You can hear what I'm saying. If you can hear what I'm saying, perhaps I can even touch you. And if I can touch you, Perhaps we can make a deal. If so, I hope to hear from you soon. We have a lot to talk about, you and I. A lot to discuss. I think I can do some great things for you, dear listener, dear friend. I'll help you out of any bind you need, and I'll barely ask for anything in return. Barely anything at all. So, a little while ago I asked you about some urban legends that you've heard of in your area. Now, I really loved reading those, so I figured why not do something like that again? This time, tell me about the weirdest person you've ever met. They might not have yellow eyes and trying to steal your name, but I'm sure there's some weirdos out there.